The morning felt like a stage set, every detail arranged to lull you into believing this quiet suburban block could never harbor anything lethal, until Garrett's voice cut through it sharp and ragged, and I realized how wrong that belief was. "Seth, don't start that engine," he shouted, and the words landed like a stone through the polished glass of my composure, ripping the practiced calm from my face as if some seam had finally split. I had been in the car, adjusting my black tie in the rearview mirror, fingering the knot the way a man steadies himself before a plunge, rehearsing the neutral politeness I would wear for my son Martin's will reading, formalities for a day when grief and business would be braided into a single performance. But Garrett sprinted up my driveway in nothing but a bathrobe and slippers, eyes wide with an urgency that belonged in a police report rather than on our manicured street. He was breathless, his retired cop instincts standing between him and the strip of ordinary morning. "Last night at 11:30, I saw Helen by your car. She had tools under the hood for 15 minutes. When she saw me looking, she slammed the hood and ran." The air otherwise seemed to hold its breath along with me as I slid from the sedan. My suit felt heavier than cloth, as if the weight of all possible betrayals had been stitched into the lining, and walked around that familiar blue vehicle with the slow, deliberate caution of someone approaching a sleeping animal that might bite. Garrett's words replayed in my head like an indictment. Helen, my daughter-in-law, the polite, impeccably made-up woman who had cried with such theatrical devotion at the funeral. Helen, who today would become the beneficiary of $40 million in the elegant legal choreography that awaited us. Helen, whose BMW had been parked on the curb in a quiet, calculated bit of pretense. I touched the cool metal of the car door, feeling the ordinary give beneath my palm, and tried to imagine what subtle violence could have been hidden in so well-loved a machine. Brake lines, tie rods, something the average driver would never notice until the road turned into a slaughter. Garrett's voice lowered, the kind of voice that had been used for thousands of late-night citizen reports and never for gossip. "Don't drive anywhere until you get that car checked. I've seen enough." There was an almost clinical calm to how he spoke. Decades had taught him how quickly a small oversight becomes a headline. My engineering mind, trained to diagram failure before it arrived, began to assemble scenarios like a man placing chess pieces. If the brakes fail 5 miles in, the expressway will be a slaughterhouse. If the steering loosens as wear accumulates, the car will wobble into a median with devastating precision. The sun poured through the garage and made dust motes move like tiny jurors, indifferent to human scheming. I called Tom Riley. Riley's garage, a man with an Irish burr, who had the sort of hands that knew metal like scripture, and asked him to come. When his van rolled up and he set down his toolbox, the neighborhood resumed its ordinary pace outside, as if nothing momentous had been set in motion inside my little world. Tom activated the lift and the sedan rose like a patient on an operating table. His flashlight painted secrets across the undercarriage. He worked with a methodical, unhurried brutality that only professionals possess, fingers running over lines and joints, eyes narrowing until the truth was full and raw. These cuts on the brake lines, clean, precise, not frayed like from road debris, surgical. I watched him trace the clean slices with gloved fingers and a dread that grounded me, the room smelling faintly of motor oil and cleaned metal, and it hit me with physical force, how intimate and patient a calculated death had to be. Someone had to know not only cars but timing, to place failure in a window that would send me to the will reading as the driver of my own demise. Tom's discoveries compounded. Tie rod ends loosened to induce creeping instability. Clamps moved, fasteners carefully manipulated to look accidental after the fact. Helen didn't want a spectacle. She wanted a verdict that would read like a tragic inevitability. The absurdity of it made my stomach hollow. 40 million reasons to stage the last act of a husband's life as a traffic accident. And for a beat, I caught myself imagining Helen's composure when she read the clause that would make her rich, a smile barely restrained, the echoes of mourning used as a costume. I called the police, then photographed everything Tom indicated, each image a cold apostille that transformed suspicion into evidence. With Tom's documentation in hand, and my heart thudding like a drum in a funeral march, I could have stayed and watched the neighborhood slowly unravel. But Martin's will was a summons that felt less like obligation and more like an audition for justice. So I hailed a taxi with hands that kept their steadiness only because resolve stiffened my fingers. The driver's cab was a small moving bubble of city air that swallowed my thoughts. The click of seatbelt, the hum of the engine, the briefcase heavy in my lap like a stone full of accusation. As we threaded from the quiet of cul-de-sacs into the impatient arteries of the city, I replayed every scene where Helen had stood close to Martin, her touch that always seemed measured, her laughter edged with a ledger, and how quickly grief could become a ledger when money was involved. The will reading took place in a glassed conference room on LaSalle Street, the kind of room where law firms stage grief with the same antitypic efficiency used to polish brass. And when I stepped into that room, the air tasted of coffee and old paper and legal formality, cooler than the morning outside, and all eyes, ritualistically polite, found me as if I were the missing punctuation in a sentence they'd been waiting to finish. She was there, Helen, immaculate in a dress that said mourning, but had the tailor's stitch of someone who could afford to hire grief. The fabric seemed to shimmer like a promise of comfort. For a second we simply measured each other. I had Tom's photos in my pocket, proof folded like a secret weapon, and she had the practiced stillness of a woman either innocent or supremely confident. The reader cleared his throat and began to speak of Martin's intentions, of the clauses that had been negotiated, and the properties bequeathed. And then, as if time had thinned to a single wire ready to snap, Helen looked at me. Whatever face she intended to present crumpled into something unguarded. Shock, maybe guilt, maybe something else, but it was enough. She swayed. The world tilted like a camera pulling back too quickly. And then she dropped, unconscious, into the polished leather of a chair. The gasps in the room cut through the legal language like sirens through fog. People leapt to her side, hands fumbling with napkins and calls, but as they blurred into a tableau of concern and theater, I stood a little apart, the weight of what I held becoming not just an object but the axis on which the next hour might turn. Had she fainted from shock at being exposed, from a calculation gone wrong, or was this performance the first note of a deeper deception? The conference room filled with whispers and the metallic tang of adrenaline, and somewhere beyond the circle of startled faces I heard the faint, unmistakable buzz of a phone, the notification that would deliver evidence to the police. Tom's photos traveling like witnesses across glass and wire, and in that sound was the promise of confrontation. The scene frozen around me felt like the cliff of a story about to fall away. Would the law move fast enough to pin this as attempted murder, or would Helen's fate buy her the time she needed to reweave the narrative? As hands hovered over phones and someone shouted for water, I realized the true reckoning was not the faint body at our feet but the question that followed it: who would speak first, the living or the dead, and whether the truth, suddenly exposed, could be kept from spilling over. The city pressed in around me like a steel labyrinth, towers of glass and concrete rising against a low gray sky that threatened rain. Every pane of mirrored glass seemed to be an eye, reflecting the traffic, the restless pedestrians, and me, the man who wasn't supposed to be alive this morning. The taxi rattled between delivery trucks and swerving sedans, the driver's radio muttering static-filled sports commentary, but none of it reached me. My thoughts were locked on Helen. In her mind I should be gone already, a broken body in twisted steel on the side of the Kennedy Expressway, a tragic accident neatly explained away. She was probably sitting in that conference room right now, glancing at her watch, lips curled into the faintest smile as she waited for her inheritance to be read without interruption. $40 million. I whispered the figure to myself, tasting its bitter weight. Enough to kill for. Enough to poison a marriage, to hollow out vows, to turn a devoted son's life into collateral damage. Garrett's vigilance had spared me, but the full horror of her plan was only beginning to unfold in my mind. The city's heart beat faster as we crossed into the loop. Honking horns, flashing lights, the metallic tang of exhaust seeping into the cab. The driver cursed softly as we dodged a merging semi, then muttered over his shoulder, "Almost there." I nodded, though my attention was fixed on the phone in my hand. I opened the folder of medical documents I'd photographed weeks earlier. Dates and symptoms glared back at me like a coded message. March 28th, fatigue and stomach discomfort. April 2nd, severe nausea, rapid weight loss. April 18th, dead. 3 weeks. That was all it took to erase a man who'd spent his life building a fortress of protection around others. Martin had been 42, meticulous about his health, annual checkups, a strict exercise routine, never touching cigarettes or alcohol. The phrase written across his death certificate chilled me every time. Unknown gastrointestinal complications. A modern absurdity. As if the 21st century had run out of answers for what killed my son, but I knew better now. I saw Helen's hand in every missing piece. She'd controlled every aspect of his care, from the doctors to the facilities to the visiting hours. I'd been forced into the role of a guest in my own son's final days, allowed only minutes at a time under her watchful eye. Back then, I told myself it was just her way of coping, of keeping control in a chaotic moment. Now it looked like something else entirely. My phone buzzed again, a text I'd saved from Martin's last week. "Dad, if something happens to me, be careful with Helen." I'd dismissed it then as morphine-induced paranoia, the ramblings of a man slipping away. But now, after the sabotaged brakes, after Tom Riley's flashlight revealed the surgical cuts beneath my car, those words had become prophecy. My son had tried to warn me from his deathbed, and I had failed to listen. The cab turned onto LaSalle Street, slowing before a towering glass monolith, etched with the name Reynolds, Mitchell and Associates. Lawyers streamed inside, suits sharp, briefcases swinging. The building loomed above me like an altar where money and power were worshipped daily. Somewhere in those upper floors, Helen was waiting, cloaked in her mourning dress, ready to claim what wasn't hers. But she would find more than paperwork today. She would find me. I paid the driver and stepped onto the sidewalk, the wind snapping my suit jacket against me like a banner. The lobby doors revolved endlessly, swallowing strangers, spitting them out changed. For a moment I closed my eyes and felt Martin's presence, a hand on my shoulder steadying me. He had built his empire from nothing, crafting cybersecurity strongholds for banks, hospitals, even government agencies. He had dedicated his life to shielding others from invisible predators, never imagining the predator would sleep in his own bed. The elevator doors parted with a whisper of brushed steel. I stepped inside, the mirrored walls reflecting a man transformed. Each floor the cab ascended felt like a drumbeat of war. 39, 40, 41. My pulse matched its rhythm. By the time the numbers climbed to 47, I was no longer simply Martin's grieving father. I was his avenger. And when those doors opened, Helen would see that Seth Jordan was not so easily erased. Reynolds, Mitchell and Associates wasn't just a law firm. It was a cathedral of power. The kind of place where fortunes were secured, reputations dismantled, and entire legacies rewritten with the stroke of a pen. The marble floors gleamed like mirrors under the glow of crystal chandeliers, each step echoing against the polished stone as if amplifying the gravity of what was about to unfold. Helen had chosen her stage well. She sat poised in a deep burgundy leather chair, flipping through a glossy lifestyle magazine with a performance of nonchalance. But when her eyes lifted and caught mine alive unbroken, the transformation was instant. Her face drained of color, the blood retreating from her skin like a tide pulling back from jagged rocks. The magazine slid from her fingers, hitting the marble floor with a whisper-soft thud that sounded, in the cavernous silence of the reception hall, like a gunshot. "Hello, Helen," I said evenly, my voice the calm edge of a blade. "Surprised to see me?" Her lips parted, trembling, but only air came out at first. Then finally, "Seth, I thought you weren't coming." "Really?" I closed the distance between us with deliberate, measured steps, my shoes clicking against the marble like a metronome marking the seconds before her collapse. "Why would you think that, Helen? Unless," I let the words hang in the air, sharp as razors, "unless it has something to do with what you were doing under the hood of my car last night." Her eyes flashed, defensive and desperate. "I don't know what you're talking about." The denial came too fast, too brittle, a rehearsed line spoken at the wrong time. "Garrett saw you," I said softly, leaning just close enough for my words to pierce. "The tools, The 15 minutes you spent under my hood. The way you ran when you realized he was watching. Helen stood abruptly, trying to tower over me, her heels adding inches that her fear had already stolen away. That's ridiculous, she spat. Why would I? The same reason you killed Martin. The accusation struck like a thunderclap. For a fleeting instant, the mask slipped, her widow's grief shattered, revealing something cold, reptilian, calculating, a predator caught off guard. Around us, the hum of other clients and paralegals filled the reception area, muffled but constant, a backdrop of everyday business, disguising the venomous battle unfolding in plain sight. She recovered quickly, forcing her voice into the register of reason. You're distraught, Seth. Grief makes people imagine things. Can grief slice brake lines? I hissed. Can it loosen tie rods with surgical precision? Her jaw tightened, but she didn't answer. Because there was no answer, not an innocent one. I have a mechanic, I pressed on. 20 years of experience. He documented everything this morning. Photographs, reports, evidence. Her eyes flicked toward the frosted glass doors of the conference room, then back to me, always calculating, always searching for the next advantage. You know what your problem is, she said suddenly, her voice dropping venom. You never accepted me. Martin loved me, not you. He warned me about you before he died. He was delirious, I shot back. Poisoned, by you. The receptionist glanced toward us, sensing tension. Helen noticed and forced a smile, draping her performance back over herself like a veil. To the untrained eye, we were a grieving widow and a sorrowful father-in-law exchanging memories. But in her eyes, the eyes only I saw, was predation, a wolf wrapped in black silk. Then she leaned closer, her voice a dagger meant for me alone. Martin left me everything. $40 million. You get nothing. She turned toward the panoramic windows overlooking Lake Michigan. The rising sun painted her in golden light, as if she were already immortalized in her victory portrait. Her smile sharpened. I was his wife, through sickness and health, for better or worse, until death did us part. You can't change that, Seth. Yes, I said quietly, my voice steady as the ground beneath her crumbled. You certainly took care of him, Helen. She didn't flinch. The intoxication of impending wealth had dulled her senses. She spoke of penthouses, of freedom, of luxury. She spoke of Martin's fortune, as if it were already liquid gold flowing into her veins. Her arrogance spilled into the air like poison gas, seeping into every word. Finally, the receptionist's voice cut through the tension. Mrs. Jordan, Mr. Jordan, Mr. Jordan, Mr. Jordan, Mr. Jordan. Reynolds is ready for you in conference room A. Helen straightened her dress, brushed invisible wrinkles from her skirt, and checked her reflection in the glass as though stepping into her coronation. Her heels clicked a triumphant march across the marble floor. I followed behind, slower, steadier, every step a countdown to truth. The mahogany doors opened to Edward Reynolds' private office, an empire of leather-bound law books, panoramic lake views, and authority wrapped in silver hair. He gestured to the table with solemn gravity. Please take your seats, he said. Before we begin, I must verify identities and review the proper protocols. Helen sat with her back to the light, her face aglow with expectation. She positioned her purse, set her phone on the table, as if preparing to document her prize, and smoothed her dress with the precision of someone about to ascend a throne. Across from her, I sat in silence, my pulse steady, my resolve forged. She believed the next words spoken in this room would grant her $40 million, but in reality, the next words would detonate everything. Edward's calm was a thin, practiced thing, lawyerly composure varnished over human surprise, but even he couldn't hide the small tremor in his hands as he arranged the scattered pages. The mahogany smelled faintly of polish and old paper. The lake beyond the windows glared with indifferent blue. For a moment the room held its breath, as if waiting to see whether the truth would demand a verdict right there in the leather chairs. Then my phone buzzed, and the ordinary sound of a ringtone felt like a bell tolling in a cathedral. Tom Riley's name filled the speaker with an urgency I could feel in my teeth. I answered on the first ring. Seth, listen carefully, Tom said, the Irish burr sharpening with each syllable. This isn't just sabotage. Someone with expertise, professional grade, went under your car. Clean cuts on the brake lines, clamps loosened, tie rods intentional, destabilized. Whoever did this knows what will fail and when. This was meant to look accidental, meant to kill. His voice cracked open the last of any denial left in me. The room's air turned colder, thinner. The hum from the office heaters sounded like a distant insect. Edward's eyes met mine, an unspoken question passing between men who had just watched a powerfully motivated lie implode. "Tom, did you get fingerprints? Anything that ties this to Helen?" I asked, my own voice bony with need. "Aye," he said. The single syllable landed with the weight of an anvil. "Partial prints on the tools. And more, this will worry you, residue. Not ordinary brake fluid. Chemical markers consistent with a compound used to accelerate internal bleeding and metabolic collapse. Something you don't find in mainstream hospitals. I'm sending photos to the station now. Call the police. Tell them what you have." Across the table, Edward reached for a telephone with the cool, efficient motions of someone who had seen too many disputes become courtroom dramas. He dialed while I sat in the center of the room wondering how many other things the darkness had hidden. Helen's outburst echoed down the corridor like the leftover noise after a storm. The security guards had already guided her toward the elevators. The receptionist's face was a mask of shocked propriety. In the hum of business as usual, the world had split into before and after. As Edward spoke, he was meticulous and grave. "We will notify the authorities. I will personally secure any copies and ensure originals are untouched in our vault. Please remain here, Mr. Jordan." His eyes were sharp now, no longer merely the eyes of a man managing an estate reading, but of someone who understood the legal and mortal stakes unfolding. We waited like a held note. The sound of footsteps in the corridor became a drumbeat of consequence. Then the building's private security reappeared at the door, a uniformed officer and two men in plain shirts. Behind them moved a detective in a rumpled suit and tired eyes, his badge momentarily visible as he lifted a hand in the nod that meant business. He announced, "Mr. Jordan, Detective Keller, Chicago PD. We were alerted to an incident. We need to ask some questions." The detective's presence made the room contract, every face sharper, the leather chairs suddenly authoritative witness stands. I handed him Tom's photos and the mechanic's notes. He scanned them carefully, lips compressed. "This is more than vandalism," he said simply. "This is attempted homicide. We'll need statements, and we'll need to secure anything Helen had on her, purse, phone, any personal effects." The building security moved with delicate diplomacy to locate Helen. Minutes later, the elevator returned and the guards escorted her, hands on her arms, not vicious but firm. She walked like a woman half-drowned, her expensive suit disheveled, mascara streaked at the corners of her eyes. For an instant her glance met mine and something unreadable flickered across her face, fear maybe, or calculation reborn. As the detective moved to speak with her, she spat words like poison. "You'll all regret this. This isn't over." The detective's questions were professional, blunt, and efficient. Helen's answers were a tangle of denial, theatrical outrage, and the canned indignation of someone used to agency. The detective remained unmoved as he took down specifics. He tried not to look surprised, but his jaw tightened once, one of those tiny tells that meant the case had teeth. Security escorted her from the building under the eyes of a dozen curious strangers, each imagining the scandal as a story to tell later at the water cooler. When the doors shut behind her, the room inhaled and slowly exhaled. Edward pushed a stack of the remaining legal copies toward me with a steadiness I found comforting. He sat back, hands folded. "We will proceed with caution," he said. "I will notify the probate court, and the originals will remain in the vault under lock and legal seal. In the meantime, give your statement to Detective Keller. If there's an attempted murder, we'll need to build a criminal case alongside any civil action." The detective left to coordinate with forensics and arrest records. Edward began to reassemble the pages with the delicacy of a conservator. The gravity of Martin's gift, his foresight, and his love, settled in my chest like a warm, terrible coal. The victory felt less like triumph than a narrow reprieve, a single successful defense in a war that might rage for years. Then Tom's voice came again, quieter this time but with urgency threaded through it. Seth, listen, there's one more thing. I put my phone on speaker. The office filled with the flat hiss of a line and Tom's clipped breathing. I found something else under the fender. A small vial, tucked behind a support bracket like it belonged to a surgeon's tray, not a garage. Residue inside, barely a smear. But my assays picked up traces of a compound that's not typically used in car maintenance. It's the same family as what I mentioned earlier. It looks like. He hesitated, and I felt something cold crawl up my spine. It looks like it could have been used in a clinical setting. Someone with access to medical supplies. Someone who knew doses, how to hide it, how to make it look like illness. Silence closed in. The lake outside seemed to dim. The office's expensive fixtures glowed in a more melancholy light. Edward's face lost color. He folded a handkerchief with the old lawyer patience of a man who'd watched too many private deeds turn public ruin. This complicates matters, he said. It suggests premeditation not only in the sabotage but in how Martin's illness may have been administered. My chest tightened. Patterns I'd suspected now knit together into a fabric I could not unsee. Helen had controlled his care, insisted on certain doctors, limited visitors, small controlling decisions that in a different context might have been explained away as prudent. Now they were threads in a tapestry, woven with intent. Martin had reached out from his fading bed to warn me. He had worried about the woman who would profit most from his death. He had done what he could. As Detective Keller rose to coordinate with forensics, my phone buzzed again. I expected another update from Tom or the detective. Instead, a single text appeared. Unknown number, no contact name. I felt my hands go steady and cold as I read it. You should have stayed dead, unknown. The words glowed on the screen like a verdict. For a second the room tilted and the polished office refracted into 1,000 shards of possible futures. Years of litigation, criminal trials, headlines, whispered vengeance. Helen's outburst had been only the opening salvo. If someone was willing to kill for money, silence was not guaranteed by exposure. The detective looked at me over the rim of his glasses, and in that look I read what we all understood. Exposure was only the beginning. Somebody dangerous had been willing to rewrite a life in a single night. And now, with the will read aloud, with the legal instruments in place, with the police called and Helen escorted out, a new question hung in the air like smoke. Who sent the text, and how many more of Martin's carefully buried secrets were still waiting to be unearthed? Outside the windows, Lake Michigan kept its patient rhythm, waves hitting rock, gulls shrieking, uncaring, unmoved. Inside, the work of justice had only just begun. The phone buzzed again. I did not move to read it. My son's last words had been a warning. Now that warning had multiplied into a threat. The war had escalated. And somewhere unseen, someone with cold, practiced hands was already making the next move. The phone call with Tom Riley played in my ear like the slow tightening of a noose. Explain exactly what you discovered, I demanded, though part of me already feared the answer. His voice came through steady, carrying the weight of 3 decades under hoods, diagnosing failures, saving lives most drivers never knew were in danger. Your brake lines weren't damaged by accident. Tom said. They were cut, with surgical precision. The words dropped into me like stones into a deep well, not random wear, not corrosion, not the careless mistake of some amateur tinkering in the dark. No. Tom continued. This was deliberate. The cuts were placed in exactly the right spots to cause total failure after roughly 10 miles of highway driving. 10 miles. He paused, letting the meaning sink in. That's the distance from your suburban home to the downtown expressway entrance. You would have hit 70 miles an hour, Seth, and you wouldn't have been able to stop. The room around me tilted, shadows stretching longer across Edward's polished mahogany desk. For a moment all I could hear was the hollow beat of my own pulse. Are you absolutely certain this was deliberate? I whispered. 100%. Tom said, without hesitation. I documented everything, photographs, measurements, tool marks. The cuts were clean, too clean. This wasn't luck, this wasn't coincidence. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. They used professional-grade tools. This was advanced knowledge of brake system vulnerabilities. A textbook assassination setup, Seth. Edward Reynolds leaned forward, his silver hair catching the afternoon sun, his lawyer's mind already calculating where this evidence would lead. Tom, this is Edward Reynolds, counsel for Mr. Jordan. Would you be willing to provide expert testimony to this effect? Absolutely, Tom replied. I've preserved the evidence. I've already prepared a detailed technical report. The sabotage was precise enough that only someone with professional training, or someone with access to professionals, could have carried it out. Helen's name hung between us, unspoken but undeniable. Her designer wardrobe, her bottomless appetite for wealth, her talent for manipulation. Of course she had connections, people who'd do anything for the right price. But Tom wasn't finished. There's more, he said, his voice dropping lower, heavy with implication. I braced myself. The steering components were also tampered with. Even if by some miracle the brakes had held, your vehicle would have become unstable at high speeds. It wasn't just about stopping you, it was about ensuring there'd be no escape once you were on the highway. Edward's pen scratched furiously against his legal pad. Notes, citations, case law forming in real time. He didn't look up when I spoke. She killed my son, I said flatly, and she tried to kill me. The words felt hollow, drained of emotion, but they were truth forged in steel, and truth carried its own kind of weight. Edward set down his pen and looked at me over the rim of his glasses. With Tom's testimony, Martin's written warning, and Helen's outburst at the will reading, we now have everything we need. This is attempted murder, and possibly much more. He reached for his phone. I'll contact the Cook County District Attorney immediately. The sun slanted through the office windows, carving long, sharp shadows across the leather chairs and scattered documents. It felt like time itself had slowed, every detail sharpened, every sound amplified. My son had protected me from beyond the grave, shielding his father and his legacy from the woman who thought she could outwit us all. Helen's greed had finally met its match in Martin's foresight. Justice was no longer just a fragile hope. It had become inevitable. The next morning, the city woke bathed in clarity. The skyline caught fire with dawn. Lake Michigan glittered like a sheet of glass, and I knew the time for mourning was over. The time for war had begun. My home office became a command center, every surface buried under folders, reports, photographs, and timelines. A father's grief turned methodical, cold, relentless. Edward connected me with Marcus Chen, a private investigator with 20 years tracking the paper trails of financial predators. We met in a quiet corner of a downtown coffee shop, the air rich with roasted beans and whispered secrets. Marcus slid a manila folder across the table, his lined face grim. Helen Jordan's been living far beyond her means, he said. Over $200,000 in credit card debt, accumulated in just the past 18 months. Designer clothes, luxury restaurants, first-class travel. She spent like a queen while her husband lay dying. 3 days later, the circle tightened. Dr. Sarah Williams, a medical expert who had testified in more murder trials than I cared to count, arrived with Martin's medical records. Her voice was clinical, but her eyes betrayed disgust. These aren't random complications, she said, spreading out laboratory reports across my dining room table. This pattern, slow onset, gradual accumulation, then catastrophic collapse. It's classic arsenic poisoning. Textbook. Someone fed this to him in carefully measured doses until his body broke. Another nail in Helen's coffin, but the final strike came from the most ordinary place. A neighbor's front porch. Mrs. Patterson, 3 houses down, had a high-definition security system that covered the street. Together, we reviewed the footage frame by frame. The timestamp 11:47 p.m., the car Helen's BMW, the figure Helen herself, slipping into the darkness, tools flashing under the sodium streetlight. Camera 3 caught her kneeling at my hood, her hands busy, her posture calm and practiced. The technician froze the frame, the high-resolution image stripping away all denial. "It's her," he said simply. "No doubt." By the fifth day the case was ironclad. Motive means opportunity, all wrapped in financial desperation and cold intent. Tom's technical report was the jewel in the crown, professional sabotage designed to end a life, documented with surgical detail. That evening, I sat alone in my study, surrounded by the weight of proof, files spilled across the desk like the script of a trial, waiting to be staged. Financial records, medical reports, security footage, expert testimony, each one a blade sharpened for justice. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Edward. "District Attorney wants to meet tomorrow. Bring everything." The machinery of justice was grinding into motion. Helen had calculated every angle of her murderous scheme, but she had overlooked one truth she could never defeat: the determination of a father who would not let his son's death go unanswered. Martin's warning from beyond the grave had saved me. Now it would condemn her. I gathered the files into a heavy leather briefcase, the weight of destiny in my hands. Tomorrow, Helen's freedom would end. At sunrise, I drove into her neighborhood, a pristine manicured enclave of wealth she'd clawed so desperately to hold on to. Her lawn was clipped to perfection. Her circular driveway gleamed like polished stone, and 2 luxury cars sat like trophies of her imagined triumph. I parked across the street and walked slowly toward her front door, every step deliberate. In my hand, the manila envelope bulged with the evidence that would dismantle her life forever: arrest warrants, civil suits, a complete dossier of her crimes. The door opened. Helen stood there in an expensive silk robe, her blonde hair styled flawlessly, as if appearances could still save her. For one brief moment, her eyes flickered with the same cold calculation I'd seen in the law office, but this time, she wasn't facing an old man she could manipulate. She was facing judgment itself, and I was carrying it in my hands. When Helen opened her front door that morning, silk robe draped over her shoulders, and the faint aroma of imported perfume clinging to her, she wasn't expecting me. The moment her eyes met mine, the color drained from her face like water spilling from a shattered glass. "What do you want?" she demanded, her voice trembling with a cocktail of indignation and fear. She tried to sound sharp, commanding, but beneath it I heard the quiver of a woman who already knew her empire was collapsing. I held the thick envelope with both hands, offering it with deliberate precision, as though presenting the final act in a long unfolding drama. "Official court summons," I said evenly, "for attempted murder charges. Inside you'll also find civil lawsuit papers for inheritance fraud and emotional distress." Her perfectly manicured fingers hovered over the envelope as though it might burn her. She finally snatched it, her eyes scanning the legal text, her lips moving but no sound coming out. You can't prove anything. This is harassment." I didn't flinch. I'd prepared for this exact moment. "Video footage from 3 separate security cameras shows you sabotaging my vehicle. Technical analysis from a certified automotive expert confirms it. Medical testimony indicates arsenic poisoning in Martin's system. And financial records." I leaned forward slightly, my voice sharp as a blade. "They reveal your $200,000 debt motive." Each word struck her like a physical blow. Her breath caught in her throat. She staggered against the marble doorframe, clutching it for balance as her carefully curated world buckled beneath her. "The district attorney has already accepted the case for prosecution," I continued. My calmness seemed to enrage her more than any accusation could. "Trial date is set for next month. I thought you deserved personal notification." Her eyes narrowed wild and glassy. She stepped forward, trying to summon menace, but the soft silk slippers on her polished floor betrayed her, making her look pitiful, not powerful. "I'll destroy you in court," she spat. "You'll never prove I hurt Martin." I let the silence hang for a moment, then delivered the truth like a judge's gavel. "Dr. Sarah Williams will testify about the arsenic poisoning. Marcus Chen will walk the jury through your financial desperation. and Tom Riley will explain, in excruciating detail, how professional-grade automotive sabotage works. Her nostrils flared. Her hands trembled as they clutched the summons like armor. But armor won't save you when the arrows are already piercing through. You think you've won? She hissed, her voice climbing to a shriek. I'll appeal everything. I'll tie this up in court for years. I shook my head slowly, letting her hear the final verdict before the courts ever did. You destroyed yourself, Helen. This just makes it official. She pressed the papers to her chest, as though the thin sheaf of damning evidence could shield her from reality. But nothing could save her now. Her neighbors' blinds twitched, witnesses to her humiliation. The golden morning sunlight highlighted every crack in her carefully polished exterior. Martin warned me about you, I said softly, almost to myself. I should have listened sooner. Her face twisted. She slammed the door so hard the glass panels rattled. Through the window I saw her collapse onto the marble floor, clutching the envelope like a child clings to a doll. I walked back to my car with deliberate steps, the weight of justice in Martin's unseen hand guiding me forward. 3 weeks later the courtroom was packed. Cameras lined the aisles. Reporters jostled for position. Judge Patricia Morrison's gavel came down like thunder. Helen Jordan, you are hereby sentenced to 15 years imprisonment without the possibility of parole for attempted murder and inheritance fraud. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The gavel's final strike didn't just mark the end of Helen's freedom. It marked the beginning of justice fulfilled. Outside, microphones swarmed me. Questions flew like arrows, but I answered with the calmness of a man who had walked through fire and emerged intact. Justice has prevailed, I told the flashing cameras. My son can finally rest in peace, knowing his killer has been held accountable. Helen's downfall dominated headlines across Illinois. The glamorous widow, exposed as a poisoner, reduced to a prisoner, her designer gowns traded for orange uniforms, her lavish dinners replaced by steel trays and clockwork rations. But for me, true satisfaction didn't come from her punishment. It came from what grew out of tragedy. 6 months later, the Martin Jordan Cancer Research Foundation launched, built entirely from the inheritance Helen had killed to claim. At the groundbreaking ceremony, Dr. Elizabeth Hart's voice carried across the crowd. Your $40 million donation will fuel breakthrough research for decades. Lives will be saved because of your son's vision and your courage. As applause rose, I felt Martin's presence stronger than ever. His spirit wasn't silenced by Helen's greed. It lived on in every lab, every patient, every family who would benefit from his legacy. 1 year later, I stood at his grave, the autumn wind tugging at my coat. They've already made their first breakthrough, son, I whispered, resting a hand on the cold granite, a treatment that might save hundreds of lives each year. I kept my promise. She paid for what she did, and your legacy is changing the world. From loss came hope, from greed, justice, from tragedy, a legacy that would outlive us all. And as I turned from the grave, the words of Martin's final warning still echoed in my mind. Be careful with Helen. He had seen her clearly, and in the end, his foresight saved me. This wasn't just justice, it was poetic justice.